Productivity is an absolutely crucial concept in economics. It's been in the news a huge amount recently. As I make this video, it's April 2015, and we're in the run-up to the general election. Productivity in the UK has not been great in recent years. We've fallen quite a long way behind, and there's a lot of discussion about exactly why that is. And it's of major concern because limited productivity means that our long-run economic growth potential is reduced, and also it makes it very difficult for wages to rise. So it's important to have a decent understanding really about what productivity is, first of all, and what a government or what an economy can do to try and improve the productivity of its resources. So this short video is just going to go through basically what productivity is. I'm going to use labour productivity for the most part, which is the normal way of considering productivity. You can consider it in terms of capital, but labour is far more common. So we're going to be looking at labour productivity. And when we talk about productivity, the important kind of definition really that we're looking here at is the amount of output which is produced per unit of input. So the output is the product, okay, whatever it is that this person is making, and the per unit of input is a unit of, if we're talking about labour productivity, labour. So that might be one worker. More normally we talk about 1 hour worked to kind of to remove the difficulties of measuring people if they don't do the same amount of hours. So normally we talk about a unit of labour as being hourly production. Okay, so each unit of labour is 1 hour of work, essentially. Okay, so let's kind of have a little bit of a look at what we might be talking about here. So let's take a little example. Okay, we've got our worker. Okay, and our worker is going to make springs purely because they're easy to draw. Even so, I haven't done a very good job there. But anyway, that's a spring. So that is a spring. This is the worker making the spring. Okay, so the productivity basically measures in 1 hour how many springs can the worker produce. We refer to that as their productivity. Okay, so the productivity of this worker is how many springs per hour. Okay, if he's more productive, then they will be able to produce more springs in an hour. If they're less productive, they'll be able to produce less springs in an hour. Fairly self-explanatory, really. I mean, just to give some indication of the UK's difficulty with productivity at the moment, the average labour productivity in the UK is somewhere in the region of 20% lower than most of the rest of continental Europe and approaching 30 compared to North America. To put that into terms that might be understood more easily, that means that in any given hour, a British worker will produce 20% less than a French worker or a German worker. What that means is that actually, if they were working kind of at the same rate per day, that actually the French and German workers could take Friday off, and the British worker would have to work all the way through Friday just to make as much as the French and German ones have. So this productivity gap is a really serious problem in the UK. It points to some real kind of efficiency problems. So let's think. We've got our worker here who's producing our springs. So let's say at the moment our worker can produce 2 springs per hour. That's our current productivity. So in 1 hour, this worker can produce 2 springs. So what can we do then to improve the productivity of this worker? How can we enable this worker to produce more than 2 springs in an hour? Well, there's 2, I suppose, well, perhaps 3 main ways that we can go about doing this, okay? One is to improve the skills of the worker. Okay, if we were to make this worker a more skilled spring maker, then they would be able to make springs at a much faster rate, and therefore we might be able to have them generate 2 or 3 springs in an hour. The second thing that we could do is we could provide the worker with better capital, okay, with better tools essentially to make the springs. I'm going to put in a little video afterwards just to demonstrate the sorts of capital that we're talking about here. But if we provide the worker with better capital, then they will be much more able to produce springs more quickly. The third thing, which is a bigger concept, something that an individual firm can't really deal with, is greater flexibility, of labour in the economy. What this means is that workers can move from job to job more easily. So, let's say we've got our worker here producing springs, and we have another worker over here who is producing forks, let's say, just because they're also relatively easy to draw. So we've got this worker producing forks, and we've got our previous worker producing springs. Now, let's say that actually the one currently producing forks would be better at producing springs. They would be more productive at producing springs, and our spring producing worker would actually be better at forks. What would make sense, obviously, then, if we wanted to increase our productivity, is for them to swap around. So our spring producer would start producing forks, and our fork producer would start producing springs. And if that were able to happen, and if workers were able to move like that between the roles and find the role where they were most efficient, then overall productivity in the economy would rise. The problem, though, is that there are a lot of things that make these sorts of movements quite hard to actually do and mean that they don't happen. For instance, having workers on long contracts prevents them moving easily from one to another. It may well be that this would require a geographical movement, which may well be difficult. It would require them to sell their current house and buy another one. That might well be difficult if the house prices where they're trying to go are much higher. They may well have their children in schools that they don't want to leave. They may well have kind of friends and family ties in the area. So all of those things would make our workers less likely to swap roles. We may also have some trade union activity, perhaps, which insists that spring workers have a particular qualification or something like that, which our fork producer might not have. So lots and lots of things which may limit the flexibility of labour within the economy. But if, as an economy, we want to improve our productivity, our output per worker, essentially, then what we need to do is deal with these three things. Firstly, then, improve the skills of the worker. Normally, this means, or this is taken by politicians to mean, more time in school or higher levels of qualifications reached. That's not necessarily going to work all of the time. It's more about the skills and how those skills translate into greater output. The second thing that they could do is provide the worker with better capital, with better equipment, with better machinery. And that will enable them to produce more in a given time period. The third thing then is to enable greater flexibility of labour within the economy. So the first two here, these to an extent are controllable by the firm. The firm can try and improve the skills of the workers by training, and they can try and provide the worker with better capital. So those two are to an extent under the control of the firm. The third one there is definitely not. The third one is under the control of the government. That's more of a macro thing. That's getting into the realms of kind of supply side policies and so on. So as far as the kind of the AS Econ 1 is concerned, you would normally be confronted with the first two, the skills and the capital points. If you were raising this answer in a macro answer, Econ 2 or Econ 4, then you could also include the greater flexibility, and all three of those would be considered as supply side policies. So key things on productivity then. Firstly, the definition. It's the output produced per unit of input. Second main thing to remember is that at the moment it's not great in the UK, and that's a source of great discussion about how to improve it. And the third main thing to remember is the three different ways that firms and government can work to try and improve productivity. Improving the skills, providing better capital, and increasing the flexibility of labour within the economy.